That's one. Yeah, yeah. Hi, welcome to another edition of Learning to Look. And we're excited to have with us today Professor Tom Germano. Now, before I introduce him officially, I want to tell you about some things that are going on here at PAC. Of course, we're coming up to the last weekend of the exhibition, Mexico Past and Present, works by, guess who? Raise your hand. Yes, she's here today with us. Right, okay. And the show will be up through Sunday. It's great. So you people in the audience out there, come on into the gallery. And okay, so tomorrow we have a different event completely. It's our first in the series for this year of whining about art. Right? And if you don't know about whining about art, we host that one at Toast around the corner on the other side of the library over there. And it's an art talk and a wine talk. I talk about art. My partner Lori will talk about wine. You get to drink the wine and listen to me. I always sound better when you drink wine, so it's much better. And for this episode of Whining About Art, we've called it 100 Years of Love, right? And we're going to be talking about the art of two famous art couples. Alfred Stieglitz and Georgia O'Keeffe will be the first one, and the second will be Christo and Jean Claude. And together they will span over 100 years. So 100 years of love. Okay. You have to pay for that one. You get wine, you get food, you get a lot of great stuff. And then back here for the end of the show, we're going to have a special event, the cacao ceremony and shamanic drumming. Right. So that's going to happen here on Sunday at 5 p.m. at the end of the exhibition. Will you be here? All right. Okay, great. All right. In keeping with the idea of mindfulness, February 23rd, it will be our next Mindful Monday, meditations and sound healing. And our next show in the gallery, right? After this show comes down and we spruce up the gallery and put up the next show, it's called Occupying Space. 9 at Bat. And what we will be having is 9 artists who come work in an art hive, the Brooklyn Army Terminal, right? Bat, right? So 9 at Bat. So I curated a group of artists that work there. There's over 100 at that site. So we'll be having that exhibition. And there are some events that go along with it. The reception is March 7th on opening day, and Coffee with the Curator will be April 11th. And also, the new thing that we started last month was Monday movies. And this month, because we're going to be showing, we're having 9 at Bat, and it's the beginning of baseball season, it just seemed appropriate that we would have a baseball movie, and we show the movies over there next door. And it just so happened that after looking at all of the work from all of the artists that were there, over 100 artists that I had to choose from, when I narrowed it down to 9, they were all women. So what better than a league of their own to show? So it wasn't meant to be a women's show, so that really wasn't part of it, but it just so happens that that's what we're going to be doing. Okay. And it's, oh my gosh, we're way ahead of the curve on that one, huh? Next, Learning to Look, I will be back in driver's seat. I'll be talking about a group of artists who come from New Mexico who really flourished in the 1930s up to World War II, the Transcendental Painting Group, and alongside of them, another artist who was in New Mexico at the same time, Georgia O'Keeffe. let's see. Oh, and here, this is ongoing all of the time. This is a surprise slide for me, but you do have the ability to scan this. You know more about this than I do, because you put your voiceover on the show, which this is all about. Right. So if you go to Bloomberg Connects scanning this, and you can find this on our website, right? It will take you to a place where there will be a description of the show, that's the current show. And Kayleen, you put this together. Well, they gave me this to show, so there we go. Okay, so those are all the things that are happening at PAC. It's really exciting, and I'm going to introduce Professor Germano, and he will be speaking about Mexico. I guess you really can't say Mexico before the conquest, right? You can clarify that where the term,
Spain.
It was New Spain for a while. It was a lot of different things, right? Okay. So Professor Thomas Germano is a professor of art history and studio at Farmingdale State College, where he teaches, among other courses, a course in pre-Columbian. It's not only pre-Columbian, right? It's all Central American, right?
Yeah, Mesoamerican through the 20th century.
Through the 20th century. Hence, we saw the first half of it in the other class, and we're following with part two. Professor Germano is an exhibiting artist, published author, and frequent presenter of art lectures throughout the New York City and Long Island areas. He holds an MFA in painting from Yale University and a BFA from Cornell University, concentrating in painting and minoring in art history. He is the recipient of 2 National Endowment for the Humanities Awards in 2011 and 2014, the Edwin Palmer Award in Painting from the National Academy of Design in 2006, an IREX Award in 1989, 12 Professional Development Awards through SUNY, and the SUNY Chancellor's Award for Excellence in Creative Scholarship 2017. And that was for?
The creative work that I did in painting.
Oh, okay. Among his many publications and lectures is a paper presented in 2019 titled Syncretism in the Florentine Codex within the panel on 16th century Tenochtitlan at the College Art Association. So although it's the Florentine Codex, it's from Mexico. Germano's painting and drawings are in public and private collections throughout New York, the US, the UK, and Europe. He has exhibited his art frequently throughout the US and Europe, and he maintains an active studio practice here on Long Island. Professor Germano.
Thank you, John.
You're very welcome.
You need me to be in front of the camera here, or
You don't, I don't know. I don't even see the camera anymore. So wherever you go,
I think the camera is where the light is, so I should probably be facing towards that.
Here she goes.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna turn the camera so we can see.
Okay. So we can see.
You're gonna be like standing around
Yeah.
right?
Okay.
I think there should be good.
Yeah, right. Okay.
Okay, well, thank you very much, John, and good evening to everyone. Pleasure to be back. And last month I spoke about the pre-Columbian Mexico, and today I'm going to be talking about from the time of the conquest through the present. And we'll go on to the next slide, please. Just a quick brief description of that symbol that we saw on the bottom right of the title slide. The center symbol is the symbol of Tenochtitlan. That's Mexico City, and the ancient name that dates back to the mid-1300s when the Aztecs designated that place as their capital. They were the last comers to the Mexican Central Valley. They were, unfortunately, those who were there when the Spanish came and ruined the party. But as a symbol, this is an abstracted form. It's a rock with a cactus growing out of it. And it's an abstract form, which you'll see here. in the Duran Atlas, that's from Father Diego Duran, who describes the myth of how the Aztec people who were arriving in Central Valley, Mexico in the mid 1300s, they saw an eagle land on a cactus that was growing out of a rock in the middle of the lake. They knew that that was the place, and they settled there, building their capital right on a lake bed. So from this mythical story, we have the origins of the flag of Mexico today. It's the same symbolism. And when you abstract that, this is the symbolism of the place. It's what we call a toponym or a place symbol. You know, that's the place of Tenochtitlan. And these are their two other alliances, the Triple Alliance, which includes Tlacopan and Texcoco. It's the name of the lake, which feeds into what is now the city of Mexico City. Next, please. So Cortés used this map as a means in which he could conquer the peoples of the Aztecs. And the map has 4 cardinal directions. I spoke about this last month with the 4 cardinal directions and the center being the middle of the city of Tenochtitlan with the double temple. We call that the Templo Mayor. This was what has 4 entrances and exits, which is the 4 cardinal directions plus the axis mundi, the center of the world. So Cortés's map that was designed around 1524 was the map of the territory of the post-conquest Tenochtitlan, which soon was renamed into New Spain. And it was supposedly for God, for glory, and for gold, but they took more of the everything from the Aztec culture. We'll talk about that center next, which is the double temple dedicated to the god of rain, Tlaloc, and the god of war, Huitzilopochtli. Next, please. And first, look at Emmanuel Lutza's final days, the final battle, the storming of the Teocalli by Cortés and his troops. This was painted by the same guy who did Washington crossing the Delaware, which is now in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. He painted this in Germany. So he had never been to Mexico City. It's all fabricated. It's a romanticized version, but he does get some things correct. There's a very valiant but futile effort to defend the Teocalli, and the Aztecs were crushed. And you see something that's also not exactly historically correct. There's no way that the Spanish could have worn that heavy armor in Mexico in the midst of the summer because it's just too overwhelming. But they did have armor for battle. They probably didn't wear it as much as what's depicted by a German artist in this 19th century recreation. Next, please. So that would have taken place in the center of the capital of Tenochtitlan. Here you'll see Diego Rivera's description of his city. He lived in Mexico City. Well, as he was a professional artist, he and his wife Frida Kahlo lived in the Casa Azul. And you'll notice the main temple in the center. That's the Templo Mayor, with 2 separate temples rising up on that large elevated place. Shortly after the conquest, the Spanish will erase all of the Aztec culture, and they'll start to change much of the pre-Columbian places into Christian, and erasing the language, the religion, and all of the cultural idioms. But keep in mind, Tenochtitlan is on a lake, which is what made the 1985 earthquake so devastating that led to the death of about 35,000 people. Lake beds are not very solid, and when the Spanish conquered, they filled in all of the lake. So today, Mexico City is dry. There's no evidence of a lake, but it's on a lake bed, and that's not a very solid foundation. Next, please. Also by Diego Rivera, this is the Tlatelolco, which is the marketplace adjacent to Tenochtitlan. It's very close by. It's like from where we are to the Patchogue Theater. It's not very far. And this is where Father Bernardino Sahagún, who we'll talk about in a moment, who authored what is now called the Florentine Codex. He was holed up in Tlatelolco, and he thought it was the end of the world in the late 1500s. It seemed that way because smallpox was claiming everyone. He came down with it. Most of his workers couldn't show up to work because they were coming down with smallpox, and most people died from smallpox, which was a pandemic of a wide scale that claimed more victims than the Spanish claimed in their conquest. But again, you'll see in the background over here, the Templo Mayor, which we'll see what remains of that today. Next, please. So in the reconstruction, this is a model of the double temple on top of the 7-layer temple. Each emperor, as they acceded to power, they made an addition. So one emperor built it, another one added to it. It's 7 layers, and inside the Templo Mayor construction, there are archaeological traces of previous constructions that just kept getting bigger and bigger. Now today, this is a projection on top of the site where the Templo Mayor was, and just next to it is the Mexico City Cathedral. They used the same exact building materials that were leveled to the ground by the Spanish. They erased the cultural history and then recycled the building materials to build the Christian cathedral. In fact, there are 2 churches next door. There's the cathedral itself and a smaller building right next to it. But what's happening here, since the earthquake, a lot of this has surfaced, and whatever was built on top of it crumbled, and more impressively, the city is sinking, and the ancient sites of the Aztecs are rising up. So I think the Aztecs are coming back, or at least they're having their village. And this is in fact rising. This is the Zompantli, or the skull rack, which you'll see adjacent to the temple. And that's an illustration from the 1500s that documents some of the things that we don't see today. But adjacent to this site, and so it's an archaeological site right in the Centro Histórico, there's a museum dedicated to the Templo Mayor, and it's just on the other side of the cathedral from the archaeological site that you see here. So 7 layers, that's what it appears from an aerial view, and each one kept getting bigger and higher, but it maintained the 2 temples dedicated to the war god and the rain god at the very top. Next, please. This is my view from the Hotel Catedral. It's a painting I did a couple of years ago, and it's from the back of the cathedral, looking at the cathedral with the National Palace over here, and the site of the Templo Mayor would be just to the left, out of view here. And then in front of the cathedral, all of this area is what we call the Zocalo. And that's where a lot of the archaeological sculpture was discovered, the Coatlicue, the disc of the moon goddess that we looked at last time, the Coyoshoki, as well as the major monuments. They were all buried in the vicinity, thinking that they would never be seen again. But since the earthquake and since some of the national electrical wiring and plumbing digs into the ground, a lot of those have resurfaced since. Next, please. In 1541, this book called the Codex Mendoza was commissioned by the Spanish, and the Spanish viceroy, who was now running Mexico City, which at the time was Tenochtitlan. This would be commissioned as a tax record and a document of the city and the old ways of the Aztec. They wanted to make sure that they kept getting revenue. Right? The first thing that a conqueror wants to do is know exactly what was being paid to the government so that they get the payments. So the Codex Mendoza has the symbol of Tenochtitlan. The cross is the 4 cardinal directions, and at the center is the rock where the cactus grows, and the eagle has landed on top of the cactus and eats the snake in the mouth, which is the symbol of the place, it's a toponym, and you can see the 4 barrios, 4 quarters, in those crossings of the 4 cardinal directions. There are day signs around the exterior, and then as we go into the book, we can see some of the offerings that each one of the cities of the Aztec territories would have to pay to the emperor. This was the tribute, the taxes. So the flags that have this white means 20. And when you count them up, there's 100 of these, which are mats. There's also animal skins, 20 leopard skins, these jaguars, and a number of different items from feathered headdresses. And the places on the left are toponyms, which indicate who's paying what to the emperor of the Aztec regime. There is no more Aztec in control. The last Aztec emperor was Montezuma II. With his death in 1519, Cortés and the Spanish start to receive the tribute, but they want to know exactly what was paid, and nobody's getting off the hook. So these are the pages that indicate that they have to continue making the payments. It's not cash, it's not a check that you write to the town of Oyster Bay or the town of Hempstead, but these are various costumes that would be worn by the warriors. These are jade beads, these are various elements that would be in vessels, and meats and textiles that would still be paid to the new overlords, the Spanish monarch, Charles V, and his viceroy, who was running New Spain. Next, please. These are the next pages in order, and this is my favorite on the far left. It's not only the tax roll, but it also indicates some of the customs of the people and what they do in their daily lives. There's a marriage going on here, and as this young couple are being married, of course, there's going to be food at the wedding, and you'll notice that their clothing is tied together. They're literally tying the knot. And as they're married, we'll see some of the ancestors that come out to this celebration, celebrating the union of this young woman and young man. Now, the next page over here shows how some of the discipline would play out. And the Aztec was a very strict society, and this is all recorded in the 1540s, just 20 years after the conquest, to maintain some of the understanding of how the Aztec conduct themselves. If young individuals were not behaving themselves, there are punishments for those misdemeanors. So these are little agwe spikes that would be put into the flesh, and it would be terribly painful. But if you think that's bad, let's take a look at what's happening to the little child on the top of this page. If somebody was acting up or needed to be disciplined, the child is held over a smoking fire with hot chili peppers, and that smoke would burn the eyes. So those were ways to steer children on the straight and narrow path. How they made sure that they were well behaved and not fresh children. Right? We don't do that anymore. We can't do that with our children or
Fresh children.
but there are the customs and systems of Aztec before the conquest. Next, please.
I went to.
It was a very good deterrent, you can imagine, as children didn't want to undergo those elements. Now, in the page on the left, which comes from Father Diego Duran's history of the culture of the Aztec people, which was quickly evaporating, and the cultural elements of the Spanish were very quickly taking over. We're looking at the history, Historia de las Indias de la Nueva España y Islas de Terra Firma, so the history of New Spain. In this page, Montezuma is sitting for his portrait, and this is taking place at the place of the grasshopper, known as Chapultepec Park. How do we know that? Well, there's a toponym right on top of this sculpture being worked on by 4 craftsmen who are carving away a relief sculpture, and that's the portrait of Montezuma, who's sitting here, and it's a pretty good likeness. He's wearing the headdress of a sheep tat, and then we'll see the headdress that was inspiring John, that elaborate quetzal feather in the next slide. But this is Montezuma modeling for his portrait. And if you visit the base of Chapultepec Park today, you can see that very sculpture, which is still in situ. It's on a boulder, it doesn't move, and it's still there. It's a bit weathered, but it is 500 plus years old. But that's the stone that these artists were sculpting 500 years ago. Next, please. Now, the headdress that inspired John's sculpture, which he'll tell you about another time, this is the feathered headdress, which is now in Vienna. And how did it get to Vienna? Well, Charles V was not only the king of Spain, but he was also the Holy Roman Emperor. and the most powerful man on the face of the earth. So the Habsburgs, which is his family line, ruled over Austria, Hungary, and Spain. And Spain was claiming territories in the South Pacific and in the New World, gaining more territory than any other country on the face of the earth. So this is in Vienna today. You can visit it in the museum there, but it is a 7-foot tall headdress. Your head would go right here. I'll do this for you. Just go right here. So you can see this elaborate headdress. Actually, maybe John can stand right there. And you can see that this is a very brilliantly colored feathered headdress with each individual feather is a form of painting with the feathers of a bird rather than pigment or paint. So these are long quetzal bird feathers that come from one place only in the highlands of Guatemala. They're fast birds that dive and swoop, and they need those feathers that balance their flight. But 3 or 4 feathers maximum per bird. You can imagine how many quetzal birds were sacrificed. And the word quetzal is the name of the bird, but it's also the name of the monetary units in Guatemala today, as this was considered a form of very valuable trade. Feathers, shells. There wasn't very much gold until much later, but jade was one of the more higher valued materials, but feathers were especially valued. And on the rooftop of Montezuma's palace, right where the National Palace is today, he had an aviary where he raised birds, and the bird feathers could be used to make things like this. It's a beautiful form, painting with the color of the bird feather to create this very elaborate headdress. And you know that he's an important character. Like this, the hat makes the individual, right? A beautiful hat that kind of is a personality reference. Next, please. There you go.
It's the Lorax on my hat.
Right? People with hats know that there's an identity associated with the hats. And with Mesoamerican hats, they're taller, more elaborate. Okay, so in the 16th century, we have quite a few books that start to record the history of a culture that's rapidly disappearing. And it's not going to be around for much longer. So we have a number of these books from the 16th century. And these, to me, are just as exciting as some of the Mesoamerican artworks, because it's documenting some of the last of a culture that we don't see beyond the 16th century. We have what's called the Historia Tolteca Chichimeca, the history of the Toltecs and the Chichimeca, and the origin myth of this culture that settles in the Central Valley, Mexico. There's a new fire ceremony at the top right, where somebody wearing a coyote overhead dress is rubbing 2 sticks and making fire. The new fire ceremony, which I talked about last month, is the end of an era and the beginning of a new era that would see either refueling the sun or the end of the world, and a need for a new sun. So this is in a room, and the room has these little niches, and the footprints is the walking into the room and then meeting the spiritual advisor within this interior cave setting. And these are the different individuals that come together to form the culture of the Tolteca Chichimeca, ultimately the Aztec that ruled the Central Valley, Mexico region. On the right, from the same book, we have fire and water, and on the bottom, the ball game. And the ball game is being played in order to maintain the balance of the cosmos. The ball game that's in an east-west trajectory is necessary to fuel the energy of the movement of the sun and the moon and sun. And it's also something that requires sacrifice, and the sacrifice is the blood. That's the petroleum that fuels the cosmos. Without it, the sun might decide not to get up every morning, and the moon might not come back, and it would affect all the tides. Next, please, John. So in the last days of the Aztec warriors, when they fell to the conquistadores, who were far fewer, but the conquistadores brought a secret weapon, whether intentionally or something that just was serendipitous, population that just didn't have the body immunity to deal with smallpox. Europeans had dealt with that for centuries, but nothing of the type had ever been seen in the Americas, and it killed quite a few people just with the newcomers who came from abroad. And they also had metal, which was not being used by the indigenous people. They had some pretty deadly weapons, which we'll see in that conquest scene. They had obsidian, which could cut through a horse's head and lop off a head with one whack. But they also dressed the part and were quite fierce in their appearance. So here you see one of the Aztec warriors wearing a costume, lots of feathers, a feathered shield that couldn't stop the metal or cannonballs or gunpowder, which the Spanish brought. And then in front of that, you're going to see a piercing, which the Metropolitan Museum of Art has today. The only reason this exists is a pirate discovered it. It was really cool and thought, oh, we can't send this back to Spain to be melted down for gold, keeping this one. And he kept it, and it's something that pierces the labret right underneath the bottom lip, and it projects out. And if that's not cool enough, that tongue flips and moves. So imagine, I mean, I tell my students, there's no way you can concentrate if your teacher is talking with something flipping out of the bottom lip, but you would be impressed and awed and just so focused on something that distracts you from the content. So this is a moving column, and it comes out of the labret, just from the bottom lip, as you can see, worn by this Aztec warrior on the right. Next, please. The whole piece is maybe about this big, and you'll see it at the Metropolitan. They've done this wonderful moving video, and Joanna Pillsbury, who's the curator there, narrates it. She's brilliant. She shows this moving tongue in the labret in the narration, which is quite impressive. In the 16th century, we'll start to see the representation of Tlaloc, the rain god, one of the two gods worshipped on the Templo Mayor, which is quickly being eradicated. The Spanish do not tolerate the pagan religions, and they're not given the freedom to speak their language or worship their gods or do what they did in their culture. That's the quickest way to erase somebody's culture. We started to see some influences from the West, and this representation of Tlaloc, which is the goggle-eyed, fang-toothed god of the rain, you'll notice that he's doing something that we've never seen in Mesoamerican art before the 16th century. And this is the beginning of the synthesis between Western and Mesoamerican art forms. He's standing with contrapposto, something that was influential from a Western perspective, but contrapposto is the shifting of the body's weight. This existed in Mesoamerican art, but you can see a figure that stands like Apollo Belvedere, but he's got a head like the rain god Tlaloc, and nothing of that head had ever been seen in Western European art or culture ever before. He's got the lightning bolt of the rain god and a shield similar to the Aztec shields that we had seen in some of the tributes from the Codex Mendoza. Next up, Tom. So in this Hernan Cortés depiction, there's a woman behind him, and this is the infamous Malinche. Some refer to her as the arch villain who betrayed her people. Others see her as somebody who was necessary to topple the Aztec, who were not admired by their enemies. It wasn't just the Spanish, who were so few, maybe 400 of them, who toppled the Aztec Empire. As I mentioned already, it was the smallpox, it was the metal, it was the gunpowder, and the weaponry that the Spanish brought. But the Spanish were clever, and through Cortés and his translator, Malinche, who was an indigenous woman, he was able to create an alliance of Aztec enemies. So you might say that the conquest was as much civil war as it was a conquest by the Spanish. So here, Malinche is translating for the clever Hernan Cortés as he's negotiating and having a conversation with Montezuma II. And Cortés is said to have been very impressed with Montezuma, did not order him to be killed, but as he says, and you can't believe anything he says, you know, he's one of those guys, he probably was away from the palace. The Spanish who were at the palace got nervous, and they attacked, and they killed Montezuma. Next up. So when Montezuma was killed, there's a debate over who did it. In this page from the Florentine Codex that was authored by the great anthropologist of 16th century Tenochtitlan, a Franciscan priest who was not there himself, but eyewitnesses were interviewed, and through all of the accounts, it seems likely that it was the Spanish who killed him. And here you can see a European dressed character and a knight with a suit of armor dumping the body of Montezuma into one of the canals of Tenochtitlan. As you remember, it still has water in it. So the color goes out. When he goes into the canal, there's no more color from this point on in the book, known as the Codex Florens. It's a Florentine Codex because it's in the Medici Library in San Lorenzo, in the city of Florence. They have nothing to do with its fabrication. It was all made by a Franciscan in the region of Mexico City. He wrote it in the 1570s, 1580s, thinking he was going to die. He gave it to a Franciscan who brought it back to a cardinal in Florence, and that's why it's in the Medici Library today. So this is one of the pages of the death of Montezuma, and it seems pretty clear here that it was the Spanish who killed him, although they claimed they didn't do it. It was one of the local indigenous population who were enemies. The Florentine Codex goes on to describe the smallpox plague, people being covered with these pox. That was a sudden death within days. As you can see, the body is scarred, and the caregivers are still there, and the speech scrolls come out of their mouths, indicating this warm and compassionate tending to the sick. Next up, John. And these are several pages from the Codex Florentine. Begins with a description of the gods, and he described the Aztec gods to Western Europeans who had never heard of this culture of the indigenous Americans before. So there are depictions, pictures of the gods. Quetzalcoatl, who is the plumed serpent. You can see a number of their names written in two languages. In fact, the entire Codex Florentine is written in Nahuatl, that's the language of the Aztec, and in Spanish, side by side. So it's a dual language. And each one of these describes a different god. And the one god, who's the god of war, and one of the ones working at the top of the tunnel, is compared to a Hercules character. So that's the only way that they can really convey a sense of what these gods were like. And each one of these in full color, no contrapposto, by the way, are the depictions of these various characters. This is Huitzilopochtli, the god of war, and the son of Coatlicue. In the pages, you'll see natural history, as Father Sagun was the first anthropologist in the Americas, and he was documenting, almost like Pliny the Elder, how all of the species from the animals, and described peccaries and a number of animals that had never been seen in Europe, American turkeys, and the aquatic life, different sea creatures, fish, and mollusks, which are all in one of the chapters. There are 12 chapters total. The last chapter is the arrival of the Spanish and the end of the Aztec Empire. The gods is the first chapter. Next up, John. So in a different book, moving on from the Codex Florentine, which I had a chance to personally turn every page in that book and photograph just about every one of the pages from it. But it's very well documented by the Getty Project today, where you can see a digital version and you don't have to turn the pages, but with nice clean white gloves, I was able to go through 3 separate books that are leather bound, and it's really a beautiful object. And it's done on real paper for the transparency, and they're using inks, all done by an indigenous artist in the Americas, but written by Father Sagun, who was bilingual in Nahuatl and Spanish. Sagun was a sympathetic narrator. Not all of the priests who came to the New World were sympathetic, like Diego de Landa, who was the bishop of the Yucatan, who ordered the destruction and the burning of all of the Maya books. And that's what you're witnessing here. As the scribe brings the books to be burned, you'll notice the torching in the hands of these Franciscans who are torching the books, all of the knowledge, everything that's ever been written by the Maya, and the pages come to life. You see the images of the gods coming to life in those books. There are all these characters, the Hecate, the duck-beaked god, whose image we see as he's described in the books. So these are not just words, these are embodiments within the book that come to life in the burning of the books, ordered by Bishop Diego de Landa. That's why there's only 4 Maya books, but these were writers. They invented a whole language, they invented a counting system, and there would have been thousands of books that would have been destroyed in the 16th century, courtesy of Bishop Diego de Landa. Next up, please. So in 1531, shortly after the conquest, something miraculous happens. And it's so unbelievable, but the expression goes, so unbelievable, and that's why people believe. There was a young indigenous man by the name of Juan Diego, who was going about his way, and on a hilltop where it's known a fertility goddess had been worshipped in ancient Aztec times, he had a vision and saw the Holy Virgin Mary. He reported this to the local bishop in the area of Tenochtitlan, and he thought, oh my gosh, now they're starting to see things, and they're taking this gospel a little bit too literally. It checked out that he was not kidding, and he explained certain things and brought roses that don't grow at a certain time of the year, and the aromatic smell is something that convinced the bishop that, okay, this is more than just indigenous enthusiastic youth. So something happened. And the next slide, please. In the story, the fable or myth or miracle, if you will, of the Virgin of Guadalupe, 1531, just 10 years after the conquest, he was in the area where Tonantzin, this character on the top, is being worshipped, and he sees the Holy Virgin Mary, who appears to him. As you'll see Juan Diego in the center here, on the top, that's the praying Mary. He then brings a shroud to the bishop, and the bishop is impressed, but he says, well, where did that come from? And it was on the husks of corn, which should have disappeared in 20 years, but it's been around for 500 years now. So it has been determined by a number of scholars who inspected it that this, like a holy Byzantine icon, was painted by the hand of God. And in this image from the 18th century, you'll see the palette includes roses, which is the symbolic flower of the Holy Virgin Mary. Now, this doesn't check out with science, and I'm doubting Thomas in most of my beliefs, but I can't give you a rational explanation for this, but the believers will tell you that this was a miracle. And go back one, please. When Pope Francis visited just a few years ago, not only did he wasn't convinced that this was a sacred relic, but he also was convinced that Juan Diego was a saint and was canonized in the Catholic Church. On the top there, with the image, you'll see the 4 sacred subjects surrounding Juan Diego. That takes place in a shrine that's just outside of Mexico City today. And that's where you'll see this relic, which is about life size, of the Holy Virgin Mary, which is venerated by Pope Francis, who recently passed away. Next, please. 2 forward. Okay, so in the 1500s, we had this phenomenon of syncretism, which I mentioned a little bit last time. Syncretism is something that we can understand where one culture tells a story and it's similar to another story. So the Christian Catholic priests, mostly Jesuits and Franciscans, some Dominicans, who are in Mexico, they start to use the art of the Maya and the art of the indigenous people to explain some of the things that they want to teach them about Christianity. So you have the birth of the maize god from the 8th century, and you have the resurrection of Jesus Christ, which is a very similar story where it's the rebirth, coming back after each year the maize god comes out of the cracked tortoise form, which is a symbol of the earth, and he's being assisted by his two sons, Spunapu and Spalante. In the same regard, this painting by Piero della Francesca, 15th century Italian artist, shows Christ coming out of the tomb. One side is the living, one side is the dead in the landscape, just as this figure comes out of the and rejoins the living. And that's something that might be explained with agriculture, things coming back to life. Now, the ancient Egyptians had an agrarian belief system as well. And Osiris, who's god of reincarnation, also came back from the dead, so he judged the reincarnation as well. This is a phenomenon we call syncretism. Next up, John. And the third, if you're not familiar with it, is how they seamlessly connect so that it makes it easier for the priests to assimilate the old beliefs with the new beliefs of course, Christianity on the population. Next up. Okay, so as we start to see more forced assimilations, the largest pyramid in the Americas, the pyramid at Cholula, has Catholic Church at the top, dedicated to the Holy Virgin Mary of medical remedies. Next up, please. The Spanish name is Santuario de Nuestra Señora de los Remedios in Cholula. Large pyramid underneath, the largest in the Americas, bigger than any of the sun and moon pyramids at Teotihuacan. And then right dead smack at the top is the church dedicated to the Virgin Mary. And that's the church on the top. One of those two steeples, bell towers, was damaged in an earthquake about 4 years ago, maybe 5 years now. So again, maybe the old Mesoamerican gods are taking their revenge. And another view of the same church on the top left, but with the base of the pyramid that goes back to long before the conquest. Let's go back one, and I just want to point out, letting on the inside neck, and that's the church of San Gabriel. San Gabriel is dedicated to the angel of the Annunciation. Let's go forward two now. And this church was built dead smack on the same ground that Quetzalcoatl was revered and worshipped. Now, Quetzalcoatl is the plumed serpent, the Cretan god, and somebody who's very important to the Mesoamerican world. The Spanish, who were the conquerors and rewriting history, leveled the old temple, and right on top of that site, they built church, a Catholic church, and a monastery within an enclosed area dedicated to San Gabriel. In the name of Cholula, in the Paris and diocese today is the Ciudad de Gabriel, the city of Saint Gabriel. So Gabriel is the annunciant angel who comes and tells Mary she's going to bear the Christ child. And here's the catch. Quetzalcoatl is the plumed serpent. Gabriel is an angel who has plumed wings. And the connection, once again, is syncretism. Next up, John. In the courtyard of the Cholula Church, we have an axial cross. And the axial cross is something that is unlike anything you would ever see in Europe before this time, as there's a fusion between the old world and the new world. Well, now that the indigenous people are introduced to the idea of Jesus Christ and the resurrection and God the Father and all that stuff that we're taught in the West, the Judeo-Christian tradition, here you'll see a cross unlike any other cross in Western Europe or Christendom for that matter. Jesus's face right at the crossing at the axial part, and the fingers that come out in a very anthropomorphic manner are like the beginnings of springtime growth. So it's plants flowering on the left and on the right, underneath the sign of the name of Jesus Christ, I-N-R-I, but it's a face and the body, which is represented in a very organic tree trunk manner with flowering fingers coming out at either end. Next up, please. Now, this is the trippiest of them all, and bringing all of this symbol together You can have in the Church of San Juan Batinchan, the convento murals from the second half of the 16th century, jaguar on the left, an eagle on the right, and in the center, black and white painting inspired by one of the prints brought over by the priest from Europe, a print like a etching or engraving, and using these prints, it's translated in a very Western European style, but overseen by the eagle and the jaguar. Old and new symbolism. That's Mary receiving word from Gabriel, the archangel, that she'll be the mother of God's Son, Jesus Christ. And then overseeing it is the eagle, which oftentimes in the symbolism of the Aztecs, flies in, takes the human heart sacrifice to regenerate the sun and give it energy to keep moving. And the jaguar represents the creature of the underworld, the creature of the night, who goes down into the earth. And there's a battle, there's an age-old battle between eagles and jaguars to bring the sun anew each day. We'll see that in the Dualidad painting by Rufino Tamayo, a 20th century painter. But these are old symbols of the Mesoamerican world with the new Christian symbol. And that's what we mean by syncretism. Combining the two, and we spoke about Joseph Campbell's connection of the two. It's a very Joseph Campbellian element there. The hero with 1,000 faces, you might say. Next up, please. Okay, the first female poetess of the New World was Sorella Juana Inez de la Cruz. In fact, her portrait is on some of the currency in Mexico today. She was painted by Miguel Cabrera, not the baseball player, but the 18th century colonial painter, and he was quite good. Most of the colonial painters who were born in Mexico, studied in the European tradition, came back and did all of the altarpieces and all of the artwork. So there's no more hint of indigenous pre-Columbian style anymore. That's erased, it's gone. Next up. And this was at the Metropolitan a few years ago. Cristobal de Villalpando, who is the painter of the Mexican painter of the Baroque. Clearly, somebody who was trained in Europe, in Spain, came back to Mexico and painted all of these grand altarpieces, which was exhibited in the only place in the Met that this could fit, in the learning wing on the lower level that reaches up to that very tall 3-story area. This would have been behind the high altar in a Mexico church, painted by the 18th century Mexican Baroque painter, clearly trained in Europe. And that's the story of Moses and up above the crucifixion, combining the Old and the New Testament. Next
Is that on canvas or is
canvas? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So here we have the very dark side of Mexican colonial painting. We refer to these as pastas paintings. And my Indian students understand this right away without having to explain anything. It's the caste system. And in the Americas, the Spanish were very quick to establish a caste system. If you were born in Spain, you were at the top of the pyramid. If you were born to Spanish parents, but you were born in Mexico, you were one rung down. If you had indigenous blood, a few rungs down below that. And if you were one of the black slaves from the African country in the Caribbean, you were probably a little bit lower than that. But there was a very strict distinction between European and indigenous in a caste system. It's a social hierarchical order, which is very ugly. It's something that decent people know better than to encourage that. So occasionally you'll have an albino indigenous person. And while she might look very pale, the child is not so pale. These things have to be established in the caste paintings because of the hierarchic order. Next up, please. Moving now to what's called caciques, which is like a local governor, like what we might consider a county supervisor or a mayor or somebody locally who would rule things. There were women caciques, mostly men caciques, but caciques, Lienzes, Historias, y Mapa are four ways that you can hold on to power after the conquest. And as soon as the 16th century, and then into the 17th and 18th century, your family had property. If your family were governors, you wanted to hold on to that. You didn't want to just squander that and say, well, I guess the Spanish are ruling everything now, and I'll just be another peon, serf to the hacienda. So in creating caciques, the indigenous people did hold on to their local power. And the Spanish needed them because they were the intermediaries. The viceroy answered to the king, and then the viceroy had his underlings, but locally, the caciques were the local governors who kept things running. Lienzes are family lines. So if you had a family tree that was connected to a certain area, you can prove this by drawing a lienza. Histories are the histories. If your family has a historical past with a certain area, and mapas are maps that indicate where your family was located and what territories they conquered or controlled. And here you have all four of those, caciques, lienzes, historias, y mapas. That's a toponym or a place sign that indicates control over a certain area. Next up. In Oaxaca, they had a very, very valuable commodity that the Spanish didn't want to mess around with. So they didn't go into the furthest southern region of Oaxaca region. There's a city of Oaxaca and there's a province of Oaxaca. So they didn't mess around with that because they had the most valuable commodity that could get a lot of money in European markets. And the commodity is this little white spud on the outside of a green prickly pear. We call it cochineal. It's something that is a parasite that feeds on the cactus, and when squished, you can create a beautiful crimson ring. And then adding certain qualities to it, you can change that into greens and yellows, depending on if you added citrus or if you added some element, a chemical reaction would occur, but it produces a brilliant, brilliant red, which we'll see on the fingertip of this young fellow. Next up, John. So we're talking about a pigment that existed in the New World that became all the rage in Europe. So this parasite that sucked the juice from the prickly pear could produce a really potent color. And as a painter, I would call this closest to a cadmium red. It's very vibrant, and you can produce dyes and pigment that can be used for artists. Next up, please. Artists such as the great European Titian, who was working at the court of Spain, you would benefit from that. Peter Paul Rubens, whose portrait of the royals Charles and Isabella in the center, Titian's two paintings on the left and on the right present the Spanish king, the most powerful man on the face of the earth, who abdicated his power, the loss of his wife, his depression, and probably his feeling really bad for what he did to the people in the Americas. He probably went into penitence, entering into a monastery and giving his power to his son Philip II. But those bright reds are produced from cochineal, and women were painting their lips with the cochineal as well. And it's still something that's being used today by a number of artists. Next up. Now, we're jumping into the late 19th century, and there's a pretty graphic artist by the name of José Guadalupe Posada. He created this character, which is skeletal form. She's known as Katrina, and she became, well, the equivalent of a pop image, more famous than Warhol's Marilyn would become in the 20th century. Every Mexican would identify with this character. And Posada was really clever because during the Porfiriato, the dictatorship of Porfirio Diaz, there was still in place the class system, the castas. So what better way to remove class by removing the skin? We don't know what color she was, dark skin, fair skin, she's a skeleton. And guess what? The same. When you take the skin off, there's no judgment. So she's a very fancy woman. She has a boa around her neck. She's got a fancy feathered headdress, and she's very aristocratic, but she's a skeleton. And this was an invention of Posada, who's brown, cast in the racial profiling of late 19th century dictatorship Spain. And that's since it mentioned the La Catrina. Next up, please. You'll see La Catrina in the center of Diego Rivera's painting, which is lucky to exist at all. It's called Dream of a Sunday Afternoon in the Alameda Park. And it was originally done for this colonial style hotel, the Hotel Prado, center of Mexico City, but this was completely destroyed in the 1985 earthquake that killed 35,000 people. In the lobby was this painting, very wide. It's wider than the gallery is wide, and about as tall as almost a ceiling to the ground. Very large painting, and it shows Catrina in the center, Jose Guadalupe Posada holding one hand, and Diego Rivera, self-portrait as a young boy on the other side of La Catrina, because that's where he developed his passion for art, looking at the penny comics that were developed by Jose Guadalupe Posada. Is his adult wife, who is in fact a generation younger, that's Frida Kahlo, holding a yin-yang symbol, and from left to right, you have the entire history of Mexico from the handed Cortés, the birth, torturing of the heretics, Sister Juana, the first indigenous president, Benito Juarez, this big guy up here, and you'll see the sisters of Porfirio Diaz, who's this guy here, underneath the Republic of Mexico balloon. This Revoltas, a dancer who's being told she has to leave the park because dark-skinned people like this family here are not allowed in these park public spaces, but they're treated like animals. And in fact, the dogs are barking, and this young, spoiled Western European girl who holds the dog is the envy of this indigenous girl whose family cannot afford a dog. So as we move across, we have the entire history of Mexico from the conquest to the early 20th century with Emiliano Zapata, who led the agrarian revolution, coming back. And although he was assassinated during the Mexican Revolution, Mexicans believe he never died. And he's always there to answer the call to the oppressed and the bullied as a hero figure. So there he is coming and answering the call. And then finally have Francisco Madero. And once again, Diego Rivera doing his second favorite thing, eating at this little food stand on the far right. The painting was originally in the hotel lobby, and the Archbishop of Mexico City refused to bless the hotel, which was common in a Catholic city like Mexico. He refused to bless it because the painting by Diego Rivera had a quote on the top that he eventually will remove, but the Archbishop never blessed the building. And it's destroyed now. The quote by Diego Rivera said, "There is no God." And the bishop said, "Oh, I'm not going to bless this painting and this hotel." And the hotel was destroyed in 1985. Miraculously, the painting survived. And you can see it today in the Alameda Park in a building specially designed just for this painting, a few other things. And it's one of the greatest treats in all of Mexico City that tells the history from Cortés's conquest right up until the early 20th century, when Diego Rivera was about this old. Next up, please. The details that help you to identify every one of the characters that I mentioned show you the human personal stories, like these two newsboys who are facing off. One is selling sweets, dulcero. The other one is selling newspapers, and they're having a little go at it. There's a little pickpocketing episode over here by this young wraith. And as we move across, these are some of the generals who fought the 19th century Mexican wage from America, which we'll talk about in a moment. Next, please. And as we get to the center, we have La Catrina, Diego, Frida, the pictures of Porfirio Diaz, who's this guy over here, a dictator who ruled for over 30 years, and all of the elections were rigged so that he could never lose. That's what fascist dictators like to do. You know, nothing like what we see in our time, but bad. And then as we keep going, one more forward, please. We see the young Diego and some of his daughters. Diego was married several times. but Guadalupe Rivera Marin was one of his daughters and his grandchild. And Francisco Madero was the person who eventually will replace the dictator, and the dictator went to Paris and lived in exile from 1911 forward. The Mexican Revolution was 1910 to 1920, and that's when everything changed. Next up, please. After the revolution, Mexico became the cultural hub of the world. American artists went there, everyone from Edward Hopper to Edward Weston to some of the authors, and it was really a flourishing place that had so much support for the arts, predominantly because the Minister of Education was subsidizing the mural projects that we'll talk about in just a moment. And these are just some of the details that I pointed out in the large mural. Next up, John. So in the mid-19th century, Mexico was attacked by America, and we went in. I'm not going to talk about all the back story, but in the painting by Richard Captain Woodville, you can see how news was slowly disseminated, and probably a few weeks after the fact, these guys gathered together on a front of a place that doubles as a post office, the American Hotel. Sign reads on the top. There's a Black man in the pre-Civil War period who's listening to the men talking as he's not beating, and some of the guys are looking over the shoulder, but they're getting updates from the war front in Mexico. So after America went into Mexico and procured a healthy amount of silver that was used for the coinage of our currency, we also bought at a very sweetheart deal, stole all of the American Southwest, and all of these territories that are in color had been part of New Spain, but now became parts of the United States of America. So I always laugh when ICE are throwing people out of their homeland. That's the Baja, that's California, all the way up to Oregon, Colorado, Utah, and Arizona, and New Mexico. Had all been part of New Spain before the American invasion of Mexico. Next up, please. The painting by Edward Manet shows the execution of Emperor Maximilian by a firing squad, and this was ordered by Benito Juarez. Emperor Maximilian was a Habsburg, and he was the emperor of Mexico after the Mexicans had achieved their independence from Spain in the early 1800s. They were still bullied by a lot of the Western superpowers who wanted to rule and take a lot of the wealth out of the country. The Habsburg emperor lived in a lavish palace in Chapultepec Park. It's still there today. You could visit it, and it's filled with Tres Grande murals. But when all of the warlords exited from Mexico and went back to Europe, he had no protection, and he thought his people loved him and he would be fine. Well, they showed him how much they loved him, and they fired upon him, killing him. And this really outraged the painter, Edward Manet, the father of Impressionist art, who painted this subject 5 times. And he was outraged because how dare, these are the words of Manet, not mine, how dare a colony kill an imperial overlord of the Western European order, an emperor of the Habsburg family. So Manet was pretty upset about that. He was pretty liberal with many of his other thoughts, but that's a disturbing element that shows the class system of colonies and Western superpowers. That's one of 5 versions that were run, and it was inspired by Francisco Goya's 3rd of May. Next up, please. Enter Frida Kahlo, who you all know, and we'll get into her works next. This is a retablo ex voto, which is something painted on a piece of tin, and it's usually about this big. And families who had ailing loved ones, sick or dying or in an accident and needed some prayers, they would do these little paintings called retablo ex voto, and they would put them in the chapel in their local parish. So these are all on tin and all painted in a folk art style. Frida Kahlo, who had the need for lots of prayers was in a trolley accident in Mexico City. At the age of 18, it was impaled by the pole that went through her, that prevented her from ever having children and nearly took her life. So in showing her story, these are prayers that have little stories underneath them that talk about what the prayers are to be directed towards to the Virgin Mary, the patron saint, and you'll see the patron saint in each one of these corners. There's a terrible accident on the upper left in Los Angeles, California, and pray for that individual whose car was hit by a truck, and they need some prayers in a bad way. So these are wishful thinkings. They're commissioned by the families, but this was undertaken by Frida herself, and we call these folk art pieces, but more specifically, they're retablo ex voto. Next up. All of Frida's works will have this folk art element, as you'll see it on the occasion of her wedding in San Francisco to the artist Diego Rivera, and that little bird with the quote on the top talks about their love and their bliss, not unlike the base of the prayer of the ex votos. The painting on the top, which is Diego on My Mind, recently sold at auction for 39.7 million, and this one just sold in November for $54.7 million. The most expensive painting ever sold by a woman artist, by a Latin American artist, and clearly
Oh, not buy.
by.
Oh, not buy.
Right.
Someone else got the money.
Exactly. So it's self-portrait of Frida, self-portrait with Diego superimposed on her mind, and she's sleeping covered in these vines and sleeping under a canopy with this papier-mâché skeleton that's been wired with explosives. And this would be used during Mardi Gras festival times. They would blow up these characters. Usually blowing up Judas was traditional, the betrayer, but also blowing up this figure of death. And being close to death, she's in the crowds in this canopy where she was bedridden for months at a time because of that terrible birth injury from her early childhood. Next up, please. The two Fridas show Frida as an indigenous woman on the right. This is a dress that you might see a Mexican woman wearing. And her mother was Mexican, but her father was from Germany, Wilhelm. And here she's wearing the European style dress, holding hands and connected with these veins that bring the blood from one finger to another. She has calipers that's preventing the dripping of the blood, that's making a design on her dress, these beautiful red flowers, but it's created also from her own blood. And the figure on the right side has one of these little Dia de los Muertos sugar skulls. That would be part of the celebration of the Day of the Dead. The heart on the exterior, but this is two Fridas and the alter ego of the indigenous and the European ancestry of Frida, and a photograph of Frida depicted in her short life. Frida invented two myths that should be straightened out. First of all, she always told people that she was born in 1910, the year of the Mexican Revolution. She wasn't. She was born in 1907. It's not because she wanted to be younger. Some women do that, too many, but some might want to be a few years younger. She wanted to be associated, coming into this world as with this new revolution that changed everything in Mexico. The other myth that she developed is that she was Jewish. She was not Jewish, but she did not want to associate with the ancestry of her father's family because her father was German and they were the aggressors in the Second World War. So she preferred to associate with the victim. And she was the champion of feminism, the champion of the downtrodden, the injured, the everything you can imagine. She just saw the movie, which talks about that in great scale. That's Frida with one of the images of a woman who was brutalized by her husband. It's called Just a Few Nips. He stabbed her 58 times, and she's lying dead in a bed, done in a retablo ex voto approach, but again, calling for justice in this age of domestic violence. Next up, please. And one of my personal favorites, Frida did this one while she was with Diego, who was working at the Detroit Institute of Art, commissioned from the Ford family and the Art Museum in Detroit. Detroit, believe it or not, was one of the wealthiest cities in the country before their hard times and the falling off of the automobile industry. But Diego was painting the courtyard of the Detroit Institute of Arts, and at the same time, Frida, who had all sorts of medical complications, was in the Ford clinic and had a miscarriage. And while she was convalescing, she did small little paintings and got back on her feet. She wasn't recognized too much during her lifetime. She's described in a newspaper article as the wife of the famous painter Diego Rivera, but today her paintings are the most valuable. And this is called On the Border, between the border of Mexico and the United States. You see the American flag on the right, the Mexican flag in her hand, and the pyramid of the sun and the moon, here to the Wakan pyramid here, and the large buildings of the Ford factory, the River Rouge, on the right side. Down below, there are electrical wiring that goes into the earth and plants that are wired into the earth as agriculture coming out. So really a dichotomy between Mexico and America, a world of technology, a world of mysticism and ancient art and agriculture and produce. This figure here is very symbolic because it's missing a foot and it's off kilter, which is one of the ailments that Frida has suffered by. She was ridiculed as a child for having a peg leg. She had polio as a child, and on top of that, she had a terrible injury. But the missing leg here is something that is a reference to herself, and that's the reason why she always had long dresses right down to her shoes, so as not to show the malformed leg, which is duplicated here. This fertility figure is also a reference to the self because it's something that she longed for. And any woman who's ever lost a child knows it's devastating and it's hard to ever overcome. She was never able to have a child. Next up. So now we come to the three great ones, and it's Diego Rivera, David Alfredo Siqueiros, and Jose Clemente Orozco as we get to the end of the presentation, the three great muralists. And next, please. Diego was the husband of Frida Kahlo. You used to say that Frida Kahlo was the wife of Diego. Now we can change that around because we know that she's clearly the most important Mexican artist, and the market agrees. This is the piece that John used for the poster, so I figured I better include it. It's from the Ministry of Education, and the minister, Vasconcelos, being Fox in Spanish, he commissioned all of the artists to wage a campaign of educating people who were illiterate and needed to learn how to understand their past, their ancestors, to understand how great the culture of Mexico truly is. So there were a lot of wrongs that were done, a lot of injustices. The peon was tied to a post and he's being untied, cut free. And in the background is a burning hacienda. It's a lot like the plantations of 19th century pre-Civil War America, where peons were indentured servants, not slaves, but indentured servants, basically very close to the same. And he did something that warranted a beating, and he's completely flailed on the entire exposed skin. And these kind Samaritans are trying to help him out, untie him from the post, and liberate him. That's the title. This is one of the many Ministry of Education murals by Diego, and he filled 2 floors of murals that are larger than this entire building. Next up, please. David Alfredo Siqueiros, whose real name wasn't David, but because his friends referred to him as the sculpture by Michelangelo, David. Here we have a self-portrait of Siqueiros. On the top, his wife modeled for the main character of the New Democracy. And on the bottom right, a painting you can see in the MoMA called Ethnographic, where we see an ancient Olmec mask on the face of contemporary Mexican wearing a sombrero. And from the Chapultepec topless murals. These are the Zapatistas, the revolutionists, who overtake the corrupt dictatorship of Porfirio Diaz. Next up, please. This is the piece also from the Palacio Bellas Artes, where the new democracy is, and this is the torturing of the last emperor of the Aztecs. Feet in the fire, tears running down his cheeks, and they're torturing these Aztecs because they're cruel and they're trying to exact something from them. So we see the bloodied women on the left, we see the emperor with the emperor's headdress, not the one that John did, but the shorter one that we saw in the sculpture from Chapultepec Park. And these are the conquerors in their armor torturing poor Fatima. Next up, please.
Oh, went too far.
And the third great, the Tres Grandes, is Jose Clemente Orozco. Now, all three of them came to America and changed the course of American art. There would be no abstract expressionism if it was not for Siqueiros and Orozco. There would be no social realist art in the Coit Tower murals or across the country if Diego Rivera had not been in America doing some of his finest works. So Mexican art was really far out ahead of American art, and FDR would commission the WPA murals in the spirit of what was going on in the mural project in early 20th century Mexico. So in the Colegio de San Ildefonso, which is right across from where the Taylor is today, you have greatest murals by Orozco, and this one is Cortés and Malinche. They are the parents of this young boy, Jorge, who is the first mestizo, the mixed race, European indigenous. You don't see his face, he's on the ground, but there's something very perverted about the nudity of this conqueror and the representation of a woman who was set up and given a palace, but also used by Cortés, and whether she was a villain or a hero, I'll let you decide, but both sides have been described of the personality of Malinche, and this is on one of the undersides of the arch with an agave plant on the bottom in the Colegio de San Ildefonso. Next up. And these are a few murals by Orozco, whose picture is on the top right. His eyes look like a steam locomotive coming at you down the track here, painting the history of Mexico from Father Miguel Hidalgo, who said enough, and as a priest, he's the person who led to Mexico's independence from 1810 to 1820. And fire will be something that will inspire Jackson Pollock, who embraced the fire, the man of fire, Orozco. On the top, we have the Zapatistas from the Mexican Revolution, 1910 to 1920. And on the right, Benito Juarez, who was the first indigenous president of Mexico, mid-19th century. Next up, please. And this is the barricade, which represents these fighters of the revolution, very much like a Christ-like figure whose arms outstretched looks like a crucified image of the Messiah. And that's also from the arched interior of the Colegio, the College of St. Ildefonso, right in the oldest part of Mexico City, built on the ruins of the Aztec Empire. Next up, John. Dr. Addo assumed a Nahuatl name. His real name was Geraldo Murillo Coronado, but he went by the name Dr. Atto, which is Aztec, and he was a famous painter of volcanoes. He did it too often, and this really led to poor breathing problems that eventually would kill him. This is a real photograph. How he would seek help with an exploding volcano, which dangerous gases that come out. And in his painting of Paracutlin, one of the many active volcanoes in Mexico and Central America, he captured these in thin air. Next up, Jim. This would not be a complete presentation if I didn't talk about the Italian-born photographer, Tino Modatti, who also was the model for Diego Rivera and dated Edward Weston, who spent quite a bit of time in Mexico City. She's captured this May Day ceremony with Diego and Frida and others who march under the banner of the Painters and the Sculptors Syndicate. And some of the most beautiful photographs you'll see anywhere. These are the campesinos reading the El Machete, whose banner was designed by David Alfaro Siqueiros, hammer and the sickle, and it's called the machete, which is the farm tool. The hands of the puppeteer, the hands of the worker, and the corn, guitar, and bandolero, which really summarizes the Mexican Revolution in those three still life objects. All rose, that means something very different. Next up, please. Oh, one back.
Oh, I went too far.
This is a large mural from the Museo Antropología, the Anthropology Museum in Mexico City, and it's Rufino Tamayo, who's also from Oaxaca. And the Oaxacans seem to have an understanding of color that doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. It's the land of cochinilla. And with that bright, intense color, he gets the color to work. And this is that age-old battle between the plumed serpent and the creature of the underworld, the jaguar, who's doing the eternal battle every day to make sure that the sun comes up and the moon stays on the opposite side underneath the earth. And that's the evolution, the daily struggle of the sun and the moon, captured in this mural titled Dualidad, or Duality. Next up. His student, Francisco Toledo, who just passed away a few years ago, is shown flying some of his kites, which he designed, and is quite an amazing colorist. These are a smattering of some of his works, but he works two-dimensionally, three-dimensionally, and also with prints. Just passing away, he was considered Mexico's greatest artist up until his death in 2019, and the last. So in pop culture, we know that the Indiana Jones character, who has this crystal skull, is really just a Hollywood invention. There were no crystal skulls that were produced by indigenous people. It's all farces. In fact, it's been determined that these were created by mechanical hydraulic tools that had electrical powered drill bits. And you can't make these before the conquest, so they're not authentic. And the crystal skulls are like a wooden nickel or somebody trying to sell you the Brooklyn Bridge. Next. In the video world, we have a couple of creations. Aztec, the Last Sun, which is a city builder of creating Aztec cities in Tenochtitlan, and Ecumin, which is a video game that pits conquistadores against the last Aztec warriors. So these are in the popular mainstream pop culture, or video gaming, a couple of devices that you can find today. Next up. And in the city of Oaxaca, which I would consider one of the greatest centers of the mural continuation in our time, Mexico City is obviously great as well, but these are a few of the murals that you'll find in the streets today in 2026. An omnipresent Emiliano Zapata, who frequently reappears, and the number 43, clenched fist, which refers to the 43 unfortunate student teachers who found themselves in the wrong place at the wrong time and were massacred and disappeared by a very corrupt mayor and some narcos who disappeared them. So that's the reference to the 43, the student teachers who went missing just several years ago. The others I'll let you interpret for yourself. And last, there is a collective of artists in Oaxaca known as Asada. And if you're really interested in street art, and I see the people of Pacho are really active with murals in the alleyways here, Asado is a political group that Yeska is part of. It's a Oaxacan street artist and the founder of the political art collective, Asado, which stands for the Assembly of Revolutionary Artists of Oaxaca. And last, this is one of Yeska's murals, which combines new imagery with some of the old imagery of the ancestors and the art of the Mesoamerican world produced just in the last 18 months. This is an example of some of the Mesoamerican meeting the contemporary in this wonderful mural by Yeska. I think that's it.
You think that's it?
Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks. Look at this.
I have one. Hey, that's a good one. Is that in a seven?
It's a Filiberto. Filiberto made that and gave it to me. Yeah. He's a local artist from Mexico.
I like that.
Yeah, you should see his paintings.
I was gonna wear my T-shirt with the Tenochtitlan cactus, but I figured I'd
Well, thank you.
dress up.
Thank you. I learned a lot. Boy.
Yeah.
I learned a lot.